Joe Biden hints at when we could see full vaccine approval. The Olympics already technically underway ahead of tomorrow's opening ceremony, and making it rain, literally, what one city is doing to battle extreme heat. Thursday, Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning, this is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Thursday, July 22nd. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. July just rolling right along, Carlo.
Crazy, right? We're going to be in August a week from now. Oh, by the way, some really good news on the home front here. Guess who slept 6 hours straight last night in the bassinet? Yay! The one and only Franimal. She did it. So we're very excited. I don't even sleep 6 hours straight, so that's huge.
That is amazing. Congratulations. That's a big milestone.
It is indeed. And by the way, guys, today is Thursday, which means tomorrow is Friday, and we will both be back on YouTube for the live chat instant premiere tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time. I think we've worked out a couple of the kinks. So join us tomorrow, 9 a.m. on YouTube. I'll blast that link out again in the newsletter, on Twitter, and we'll mention it again tomorrow morning.
It was really fun. I mean, maybe we're obviously a little biased because we love the podcast, yes. But I had a great time chatting with everybody and kind of just listening and talking about it. It was fun.
And tomorrow we can talk Olympics and whatever else is on people's minds.
All right, let's get to some news here. President Biden predicting during a CNN town hall event last night in Ohio that the FDA will fully authorize the coronavirus vaccines, quote, quickly, and that they would be approved for children under 12 on an emergency basis, quote, soon. The president also saying, quote, you're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. Now, that is not really accurate. We know that breakthrough infections are occurring, and by the way, they're not 100% effective. So when you have hundreds of millions of people who are vaccinated and they're 95% effective, do the math. I mean, those breakthroughs do occur. And actually, some staffers in the West Wing have had some breakthrough infections. You know, the whole point is, though, that if you do get them, you're probably going to have mild symptoms as long as you're vaccinated.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the U.S. extending travel restrictions for Mexico and Canada at least for another month.
Yeah, I think Biden probably. I mean, he steps on himself, right, when he's talking not on a teleprompter. So I think what he meant was, you're not going to get intubated if you have the vaccines, which is true. I do hope that we can get some sort of hybrid immunity by the winter. I think that's probably our best case scenario here. The silver lining, I guess you could say, of Delta just sort of ripping through these under-vaccinated communities is that a lot of people are going to be getting some immunity that they hadn't already had, and that is if they don't die, of course. And as sad as it is to say, that really may be our best hope, Jill, in terms of avoiding a miserable fall and winter surge, which I worry about. And we cannot afford that just in terms of getting people back to the office and, more importantly, kids back to school for good.
The toll on children from the mental perspective, from so many different ways, from academic perspective, is just, I don't think we're going to really appreciate it for years to come. One thing that I did want to mention, perhaps one way that we can inch toward some sort of herd immunity, New York City is going to be requiring healthcare workers to get vaccinated or submit to weekly tests. That's thousands. That's, I think, 40, 50,000 additional people. And who knows? Some of them may say, just, I'll do the testing. But that's kind of what I think is going to have to happen, especially, I was listening to this one report. Could you imagine if your child has cancer, God forbid, or is really sick and has to go to the hospital and then gets COVID from a nurse or somebody in the hospital?
Yes.
I mean, these are your most vulnerable people, right? Like kids who have really underlying issues and are super sick and their immune systems are compromised, and the healthcare workers at the hospital can't bother to get vaccinated.
It's gross, kind of, really. I mean, it's funny you say that, actually, because the other day there was this story that was going around on one of those right-wing sites, The Blaze, maybe, or Breitbart, but it was talking about how St. Jude, the big children's hospital in Memphis was requiring vaccines for their staffers, and the article was framed like this is some sort of like infringement on their rights. It's like St. Jude is a children's hospital. You're talking about the most immunocompromised people on earth in there.
Exactly. It's just.
If you don't want to work there, by all means, take another job. But geez.
Speaking of just stories on social media, this was all over social media yesterday. A viral Facebook post from a doctor in Alabama describing the scene at her hospital. Dr. Brittany Cobia describing how all but one of her COVID patients did not get the vaccine, and many of them are young and otherwise healthy. Some have died while the vaccinated patient recovered. She writes, quote, "One of the last things they do before they're intubated is beg me for the vaccine. I hold their hand and tell them I'm sorry, but it's too late." Alabama is last in the U.S. in terms of its rate of fully vaccinated adults.
I just want to keep reading from this woman's post because it's probably one of the better things you could send around to someone you know who maybe has been vaccine hesitant. Again, she's just a doctor in a hospital in Alabama, regular, hardworking American. She has no political ideology that I can tell or anything. She continues to write, quote, "A few days later, when I call time of death, I hug their family members and I tell them the best way to honor their loved one is to go get vaccinated and encourage everyone they know to do the same. They cry, and they tell me they didn't know. They thought it was a hoax. They thought it was political. They thought because they had a certain blood type or a certain skin color that they wouldn't get as sick. They thought it was just the flu. But they were wrong, and they wish that they could go back, but they can't. So they thank me, and they go get the vaccine. And I go back to my office, write their death note, and say a small prayer that this loss will save more lives." End quote.
The problem is it won't. It won't. I mean, that's the whole thing. It won't.
Right.
There is, I'm so kind of, it's so sad, but at this point, if you're stuck in your, set in your ways, you're not getting it.
Well, I mean, if there's one thing that may change some of these people, it's something like this from an actual doctor or seeing somebody in their community or in their family, I guess.
The comments, though, if you look at the comments, people don't believe this account.
Of course, right. Of course,
you know
it's
what
fake.
I mean?
Everything's fake, yes.
Everything's fake. There was nothing real. It's like Scott Galloway posted this, and some of the comments on his thing were like, "Oh, come on, this can't possibly be real." Whatever. Okay. It's so disheartening. But,
I know what you mean, Jill.
Let's move on here. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has banned 2 House Republicans from sitting on the committee investigating the Capitol riot, saying that they would harm the, quote, integrity of the investigation due to their outspoken support of former President Trump. Representatives Jim Banks of Indiana and Jim Jordan of Ohio were put forward by GOP leadership for seats on the panel, even though they both voted to overturn the results of the election hours after the January 6th siege. House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy responded by pulling all 5 of his picks from the committee, calling it a sham, and pledging to boycott the process.
That means that the only official investigation into what happened that day is likely going to be done now almost entirely by Democrats, with the one exception being Liz Cheney, who is on this committee. This was sort of always where this was going, and the only commentary I'll add is just don't forget there was an opportunity for this to be a fully independent, bipartisan exercise, but Senate Republicans blocked it last month. So this is what we get in return.
In this case, though, given that it was so obvious that McCarthy was going to then just call it all sham and say he wasn't going to participate in pulling all 5 of his picks, I don't know. I tend to think maybe Nancy Pelosi should have just let them be on the committee, and let let that process play out. I don't know. I don't know politically if this was the right move by Nancy Pelosi, because now this whole committee and investigation is tainted, and Republicans are going to say it's a Democratic investigation.
Right.
And I don't know. To me, I would have just said, just let them be on it.
Yeah, no, I get that argument. I think the problem is that by putting these guys, these particular Republicans on this, as Matthew Dowd on ABC News said the other day, it's like it'd be like putting Bernie Madoff on the SEC. Like the Republicans torpedoed it just by putting these guys on it because they are, true believers that like the election was stolen. Yeah,
it's just like at this point though. It is sort of like the people who need to hear this information aren't going to believe it because they're going to just say it's biased, it's all Democrats. No good answer, really.
Right.
A bipartisan group of state attorneys general has reached a $26 billion settlement with Johnson & Johnson and 3 major drug distributors over their role in the opioid epidemic. All 50 states and D.C. need to approve the settlement. If they do, billions of dollars for addiction and prevention services would start rolling out to cities and towns around the country. In return, states would drop thousands of pending lawsuits against these specific companies, J&J, McKesson, Cardinal Health, and AmerisourceBergen. You may not know these last 3 by name, but they are the companies that distribute many of the pharmaceuticals prescribed by doctors.
Yeah, and they're supposed to monitor the quantity of drugs being prescribed, which they did not do for 20 years, which helped create this epidemic. There's a lot of people responsible for this, right? It's not just one company or one person, but they are among those responsible. Johnson & Johnson, meanwhile, made a lot of the actual opioids, and they downplayed their addictive properties to doctors and patients for years. There are many other lawsuits remaining in this whole rigmarole here, including a big one with Purdue Pharma, which is the company that makes OxyContin. That one is in the process of being settled. But this was a widely expected, but I think important first step in sort of, bringing this sort of sad American thing to an end. Although I shouldn't even say it's coming to an end, because if you remember from the CDC last month said opioid overdoses were at a record high last year. So this is still something that we're contending with.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was actually exacerbated during the pandemic.
Yeah,
so right. It is really heartbreaking. About time that something is done and some of these companies are held accountable. And hopefully some of these programs that they put in place will actually help people. I have a friend who really struggled with opioid addiction, and she kicked it on her own. And she told me that even when she went to try and kick it and she went to kind of a group for help, they didn't prescribe her, but they recommended that she go on just a lighter opioid.
Really?
She was like, no, I want to, as a way to sort of gently
wean herself
off. And she was like, no, I want to just do this. Now, I don't want to introduce something else that I'm going to get dependent on.
Right.
So it's a huge problem, a lot. And as we know, it's taken way too many lives.
Yeah. The flip side of that is that my brother was badly hurt. He got jumped a couple years ago, and he was badly hurt in the hospital, and they wouldn't give him they would just give him Tylenol. So he was like, can I get something a little bit stronger?
Can you help me out? Just because it was just the pendulum has swung so much the other way.
Exactly. But I still, better that. I mean, the last thing he needs is an opioid addiction, right?
All right, Carlo, switching gears, Amazon's Alexa is getting a new name and voice, if you so choose. Amazon has started to roll out a version of its popular voice recognition software that has a more masculine-sounding voice. They're calling it Ziggy, and you could set it by telling Alexa to, quote, change your voice. We're going to play a little clip right now of what Ziggy sounds like.
Traffic on your commute looks pretty clear. The fastest route takes about 16 minutes via South Jackson Street and Bourne Avenue South.
What do you think, Carlo?
Is this something people were clamoring for, I guess? I don't know. The only one of these things that I know that you're an Alexa user. The only one of these that I've ever used is I use Siri in the car. When I'm driving, my car can connect to my iPhone somehow. And it's helpful if you need to call somebody so you don't have to actually look at your phone. But that's the only one that I use. And the only other thing I'll say is that when we were choosing baby names, Becky would regularly shoot down a name that I chose if she thought that there was any chance of it becoming one of these tech company voice assistant names. But
listen, we dealt with this because Alexandra has been I named Alex after my Papa Al.
Right.
And I had always, from the time I was a little girl, loved the name. It was also meaningful for my husband. And we really thought about it because we're like, is it too similar to Alexa?
Right.
And then ultimately we decided, no, we're going to just stick with what we want to do and go with Alexandra. And it's been fine. And it's been lovely. I can't imagine her being named anything else. The thing, though, just about the idea of them changing the voice, I think that it has more to do with just this idea of why voice assistants in general were all female.
Right.
And kind of playing into sort of this sexist mentality. That more than just somebody was like, I
didn't think about that. You mean like like they're the assistant.
Yeah,
so
like
they're
why
a
is your
woman.
secretary basically like? Think about it. What do you know? I ask Alexa, "Hey Alexa, set a timer." Alexa, do this. And as I say this, I hope no one's listening to this out loud, and I'm setting off their device. But yeah, I mean that's sort of that was kind of the criticism that
I
prompted
see.
the
Okay.
change.
I didn't think about that. I just think that I find that women's voices are more like soothing in this way. I guess you would say. Like I like the Google Maps lady. Like I'd rather hear her than like I don't know.
It depends on the voice, though,
yeah,
right?
I guess right. British voices are good on this. I think.
Let's switch gears again. The Olympics don't technically start until tomorrow, but some tournaments already underway. The U.S. women's soccer team went down in their Olympic opener, losing 3-0 to Sweden. A heartbreaker there.
Yeah.
5 years ago, it was the Swedes who knocked the U.S. out of the gold medal contention in Rio. Meanwhile, the U.S. softball team undefeated after their first 2 games as the sport is reintroduced to the Olympics after a 13-year hiatus.
Ipsos did a one last poll before the Olympics. 22% of Japanese people think that the game should go on. 52% of Americans, which I thought was a little bit kind of interesting. Not particularly good here, even. Although it doesn't matter, right? They're happening. So let's try and get amped up for this, right? Surfing, skateboarding, those are 2 of the sports that are going to be they're coming back this year or starting for the first time, so that's cool. I think I'm going to try and get into Olympic skateboarding, maybe. I'm trying here, Jill. I'm trying to get Olympic fever.
I think some of the new sports are kind of cool, actually. But I spoke yesterday on Cheddar to the Boston Globe basketball correspondent, Gary Washburn, who's in Tokyo right now covering the games. So he said it is still technically possible that these games could be canceled.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that is wild, right? These athletes are there, the games have started. He said even once they start, they could potentially be canceled. And what would the reason would just be if there was some type of major COVID outbreak, either amongst athletes or even just within Tokyo itself. As for the athletes, I said, how are they doing? Like, what's their mental state right now? And he said they are so excited to be there. Yeah, he's like, because a lot of the big names that we've talked about, Serena Williams and others, sitting it out, right? But anyone who's there wants to be there.
Yeah.
And they are all in.
That's the
and
pinnacle
they're
of your
super
career.
Psyched.
Right.
So I tend to think that once some of the bigger names and once some of the bigger events start to be broadcast, and I think NBC is going to probably do a great job of leading up with telling the personal stories of some of the athletes, I think we're all going to get into it.
Okay. From your lips, Jill, because I'm
think so.
prepared.
I hope so.
I need something to watch, if nothing else, right?
On the Olympics beat as well, the creative director of the opening ceremony has been fired a day before the event after a video emerged of him joking about the Holocaust back in the 1990s, the latest in a string of scandals that have hit the organizing committee. What is that about? I mean, why does anyone, the way that people invoke the Holocaust or joke about the Holocaust, with people still walking around with numbers on their arms, is
it's
so
amazing.
Offensive and it's so beyond the pale. There's nothing to say about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Also, did you see this other scandal with the Norway handball team? Have you been following this a lot? So they were fined, the members of the Norway handball team were fined 150 euros each by the European Handball Federation. So this is separate from the Olympic Committee. But why were they fined? They were fined for wearing shorts instead of bikini bottoms during a game last weekend. The women on this team had planned to wear the shorts as sort of like a form of protest, given that men's handball players are allowed to wear shorts while women are required to wear bikini bottoms, quote, with a close fit and cut on an upward angle toward the top of the leg.
It's so ridiculous. I mean, they should. In a normal world, okay, you would think it would be the reverse. That they had to wear shorts and were fined because they wanted to wear bikini bottoms. The fact that the Olympic Committee is fining them for saying we want to be a little more covered up is so backwards. It's crazy.
I guess they think that's the only thing that's going to get people to watch handball. I don't know. I don't even really know what handball is.
Finally, could this be something we're going to see more of? Dubai's government has started to use drones to create artificial rain as a way to battle the extreme heat the city's facing in the summer. Meteorologists in the UAE released a video showing a rainstorm that was entirely the result of drones zapping the clouds with electrical charges. The electricity creates large raindrops, that would have otherwise evaporated before they hit the ground in the desert climate. Dubai is dealing with an exploding population and dwindling water resources. The city gets almost no rain in the summer, and temperatures have been averaging over 120 degrees Fahrenheit this year. Wow.
It's pretty cool.
It's a kind of a brilliant idea. I don't know how I feel about it, but it's pretty smart.
So okay, quick Need2Know book club here. I'm currently reading a book called The Ministry of the Future by an author called Kim Stanley Robinson. This book was recommended to me by two separate people. That's generally my rule of thumb for books. If two separate people recommend something to me separately, I will read it. By the way, they don't tell you, Jill, that when you have a baby, reading for pleasure really goes by the wayside. I've had like no time to read, which is one of my favorite.
Everything goes by the wayside.
Yeah. Anyway, back, what was I saying? Okay, well, I just started this book. It's really good so far. The premise is a little bit depressing. It's sort of a fictionalized telling of our near future and how the world responds to the climate emergency. It's sort of like, it's sci-fi with like a little bit of a touch of humanism. But I mention it right here because one of the things that they do in the book is a way to deal with this heat wave that starts the book out, in which 20 million people in India are killed, is that the Indian government starts to fly planes that blast like particulates into the sky in order to reflect the sun's rays. And it actually works. It cools the planet, at least for a little while. And I haven't gotten far enough to see what happens after that. But I say that it's a great read if you're into this sort of thing, and it's cool because you can sort of, we talk so much about climate and it feels so depressing and so like, you just feel just like, what am I gonna do, like helpless? But this book is cool because it lets you envision some of the ways that we may use technology to come up with, adapting to the warming planet.
Look at you ending the podcast on a high note. I like it.
That's me.
Okay, cool. So it's called The Ministry
for the Future. Yep. Check it out.
I have Baker's lending me a book about the behind the scenes of the Housewives and how they make the Real Housewives. That's basically where I can.
Hey, whatever.
That's where I can go for the summer.
Jill, whatever makes you happy, man.
Okay, that is what you need to know for Thursday, July 22nd.
All right, guys. See you tomorrow on YouTube.